Welcome to the fifth section, which covers barrier hygiene. In this section, we'll be looking at the general principles of barrier hygiene, both physical and operational. We'll look in more detail at the physical barriers and how these are incorporated into the SOP. We'll look at the disposal of hazardous waste, and particularly the legal controls that govern this. As before, you'll have the opportunity to test your knowledge with 8 multi-choice questions before moving on to the 6th and final section. We know that the objective of our infection control policy is to prevent pathogens reaching a susceptible site in sufficient numbers to cause an infection. Barrier hygiene drills down into this wide definition to target the key areas in detail. These are the areas which, if carefully addressed within the practice, will be very effective in assisting us to secure the objective. Operational barriers, for example, the SOP, and physical barriers such as personal protection equipment, stand together as the foundations of good barrier hygiene. The barrier hygiene program in the practice will help to prevent an outbreak of a new microbial challenge before it starts, or secure that existing patients are protected from each other where disease transmission is a risk. In this sense, we're providing a process of prophylaxis. Another important wing of barrier hygiene is the prophylaxis provided in a treatment and intervention program. This includes inoculation and prophylaxis for parasitical invasion. Personal protection equipment, or PPE, is designed to protect the user from hazards and to make access to various locations safe from accidental introduction of an infectious agent or the transportation of an infectious agent out of the area. PPE includes barrier protection such as gloves, gowns, smocks, aprons, overalls, footwear covers and eyewear, all suitable to the risks involved. For example, impervious fabrics should be used where liquid risks are involved. Employers must take steps to protect employees from recognized hazards, including zoonotic biological agents, but it is the responsibility of all co-workers to adhere to the SOP. For veterinary professionals, each case or external visit must include an active risk assessment. They must have on hand PPE adequate for any predictable infectious hazards that they may encounter. In addition, all staff that may be asked to use PPE must be trained in its use. Under notified disease orders, boots and foot baths will be required. Disposable garments are also highly recommended. PPE alone is not enough. There is no substitute for effective personal hygiene. Frequent hand washing has already been mentioned in a previous section, but the technique has not. A separate guide to effective surgical style hand washing can be obtained from Medimark Scientific, and effective protocols should be incorporated into the SOP. Equipment such as liquid soap dispensers should be regularly cleaned and disinfected with a separate solution to the formula contained in the dispenser. The properly maintained isolation ward is a key element in barrier hygiene. The exercise areas should be maintained in a high state of decontamination at all times. After each isolated animal is exercised, the strictest high-level cleaning and disinfection processes should be conducted. Utilizing a color-coded system to identify key risk areas and ensure that equipment remains within the area it is recommended for, rather than being a source of cross-infection between key areas, is a useful tool in reducing the risks of potentially contaminated material. Protection from insect vectors, using authorized chemical aids, is essential. Practices differ from each other according to clientele and market sector served. Some specialize in small animal medicine, others in equine, others in large animals. The standard operating procedures, the SOP, of any practice will be tailored to the layout and general business philosophy of the practice, and the head vet and his or her team will decide on that content. It will be a guide to all the critical operational issues that help maintain safe environment for patients, client owners, and veterinary professionals. Once established, all personnel must be familiar with it, and the practice management must ensure that comprehensive, regular updates and retraining are given, especially as new colleagues join the team. In the context of barrier hygiene, the SOP will address the transit of animals within and outside the practice, while the animal is under practice control. It's always necessary to move between areas of the practice. In doing so, we can spread the risk of disease unless adequate barrier protection procedures are taken. Moving from one area to another requires the use of door handles and many other areas. If you are exiting a recovery area, the isolation areas or theatre, without these precautions you may be unwittingly carrying pathogens and leaving infectious traces. Using barrier PPE such as fresh aprons and footwear covers, for example, will minimize this risk. The movement of animals into and out of isolation or recovery is a function of the animal's condition. Only a qualified veterinarian should authorize such movements, taking into account further infection risks to the patient and to others from the patient. The key to effective management of veterinary waste is clear identification and segregation. Some wastes are hazardous and require specialist disposal. This means the waste must first be identified and segregated. It is generally the responsibility under the relevant legislation for the waste producer to segregate hazardous waste and likely infectious material from standard non-infectious waste. Segregation should take place as close as possible to where the waste has been generated. It should be maintained in color-coded containers in separate storage pending removal. Safe storage of hazardous waste implies secure bagging in certified impervious bags. Double bagging should be adopted as policy subject to legislation. Bags with infectious waste should be marked with the International Infectious Substance symbol. Sharp waste, such as needles or disposable scalpels, should all be collected together in a specially regulated puncture-proof container. These should be rigid and impermeable. Out-of-date pharmaceuticals should be returned to specialist authorized agencies for disposal. We've now reached the end of Section 5, covering barrier hygiene. You can test your knowledge by taking the quiz. As before, just click on the quiz button below. And if you get any wrong, you can always review this video again to refresh your memory. You can now move on to Section 6, which is the last section in this module.